Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Anglo-Japanese Foundation. My name is Jason James. I am going to introduce our two speakers. Now, I'm struggling to know exactly how to describe Carl. It says, what does it say? Compass 8. That isn't mentioned on here. But anyway, Carl is a kind of wandering specialist on aid and development and has worked closely with Japan. He's worked for the World Bank and various consultancies and NGOs and been a senior official in G7 meetings working with Japan on aid issues. So a bit of a Japan focus there, and in fact we used to work together in Japan, so I know him also as a broader Japan expert than that back in the day anyway. And then our other speaker today is Kuniaki Amatsu, and he is the JICA representative in the UK. JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency or something? Yep, okay, just trying to remember what it stands for. So JICA is Japan's government aid agency, as I'm sure many of you will be aware. And Amatsu-san has been working for JICA for about 30 years, including posts in Vietnam, Nigeria, and Tasmania. And he's the author of a number of papers, particularly on industrial development. That's his special topic within aid. And he's been in London now for about a year. So it's very nice to have you here at the Dairo Foundation. And on that note, I will pass over to you. Carl, you're starting.
No,
Amatsu. All right.
I'm going to go sit over there.
Okay, thank you very much. So good evening to everybody. So I'm Kuniaki Amatsu, representative of JICA UK. I'm based in London. So today's topic is about JICA international development from the perspective of JICA practitioner. But as I said, I put here disclaimer. This is purely my personal views. Therefore, I'd like to talk about international development as very straightforward as much as possible upfront. Then, okay, so this is a 15-minute discussion, presentation. So, I should insert the slide about table of contents. So today, first of all, I'd like to explain the Japanese ODA, in particular ODA ranking. But this is not main topics. And after this one, I'd explain JICA, because I'm not sure to what extent you are familiar with the JICA in Japanese ODA system. Therefore, I'd explain that. And third one, I'd like to explain JICA's. I'd like to explain the current world. From the international development perspective. What has changed, what has not changed. Then, based on this perception, how should donors do for achieving international development? That is the important point. But depending on your background, this topic would be a bit technical and specific, I'm afraid. Therefore, fortunately, Carl prepare the more policy issues, including the UK and Japan. Therefore, probably, if you feel this is a bit technical, you can you can have a better understanding. After Carl's presentation. But anyway, this is a big important point. But Japanese ODA is a top donors around mid-1990s. But due to the Japanese economic situation and budget situation, our position is declining. But after we reach the bottom of the budget 2015, our budget is increasing gradually. Then now, according to OECD statistics, our ranking is now third. According to the latest figures. Then, I'd like to explain what is JICA in Japanese ODA system. We need to have a basic understanding of JICA and also in comparison with UK system. In UK ODA system, you have a former DFID and currently you have a FCDO. Then, former DFID and the current FCDO is in charge of almost everything from the policy making and decision making and also implementation. That is the FCDO's and former DFID's main characteristics. But in the case of JICA, So we are not in charge of policy making and higher level decision making, because we have a bit segmented role between Japanese Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, JICA. So Ministry of Foreign Affairs is in charge of policy making, like development cooperation charter, and so other policy issues, and decision making, which project should be approved or not. And so implementation is led by JICA. Therefore, we need to distinguish this division of labor, so in Japanese ODA system. Then, probably you're already familiar to this chart. So ODA, economic cooperation money, can be divided in three parts: ODA, official development assistance, and other official flows, OOF, and also PF, private flows. But in the case of ODA, we can divide it to two parts: bilateral assistance and multilateral assistance. So JICA is in charge of the part of bilateral assistance, because so JICA's portion is a majority in Japanese bilateral assistance, but we are not, we don't cover everything. Then under this diagram, we provide our international development activities through using the several aid instruments. One is the technical cooperation, and financial and investment cooperation, and grants aid, and other private sector operation, and also frontier instrument. We say JOCB. Then, so in the case of multilateral channels, so we can divide the Ministry of Finance part and Ministry of Foreign Affairs part. Usually, the Ministry of Finance provides the money to MDB, multilateral development bank, such as World Bank and regional development bank, and so on. But the UN financial contribution is managed by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, usually. This is the overall picture. Then our policy framework like this. Our overall policy framework is Development Cooperation Charter. Previously, we said ODA Charter, but in 2015, we changed our name, Development Cooperation Charter. And under this Development Cooperation Charter, so we make clear so what is a philosophy of Japanese ODA, and also what is a target area, and so on, and key principle. Then, based on this, so Ministry of Foreign Affairs developed the medium-term objective. This is a guiding document from Ministry of Foreign Affairs to JICA. Then, so under this medium-term objective, so this covers 5 years. So we, JICA, develop medium-term plan 5 years. Then we develop so annual plan as well. So this is the structure. Therefore, so development cooperation charter and medium-term objective are managed by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and bottom two is managed by JICA. This is the difference. Then, so what so JICA's current medium-term plan described in the document is, so we have 4 pillars. So first one is FOIP, we say FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific issues. We try to promote, we try to realize so FOIP as much as possible, so in the current geopolitical changes. And second one is cultivate future leaders responsible for the development of their countries. And third one is strengthen the initiative to climate change and environmental issues. And fourth one is contribute to revitalizing Japanese economy and society and promoting understanding for cultural diversity in Japan. So this is the 4 pillars. Because these 4 pillars are coincident with Japanese Development Cooperation Charter through the channel of medium-term objective by Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then this is our operations. So South Asia Pacific case is a 21 country, but this is not important issue in this presentation. So biggest operation here is South Asia. So 680.4 billion Japanese yen. Then followed by Southeast Asia and Pacific. Then so Latin America, this one, Middle East, Europe, and so on. Therefore, so traditionally and currently, traditionally we focus on so our aid to Southeast Asia. But so depending as change their economic development status, we are shifting it from Southeast Asia and South Asia. And of course, so when we look at every people look at this budget allocation or execution, many people say so JICA or Japan, but in particular in this case JICA tends to focus on middle income countries and also Asia. But this is not true because so demand of development is various according to the region and countries. Then in the case of Southeast Asia and South Asia, they are expecting us to provide economic infrastructure and so on. Then to finance economic infrastructure, probably appropriate aid instrument is concessional loan, not granted. Therefore, naturally or inevitably, when we look at this amount of budget allocation, we tend to focus on Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia and South Asia. Of course, Africa is only 100 billion US dollar, Japanese yen. But this does not mean JICA or Japanese government think much of put lower priority to this sub-Saharan Africa, because their situation is still under development and updating. Therefore, their main focus is relatively not large scale infrastructure, but more social issues and more smaller size infrastructure. It means we do not have to. Concession loan is not appropriate aid modality. And also, we also need to consider their borrowing capacity. From the viewpoint of macroeconomic situation. Therefore, naturally or inevitably, this rank of sub-Saharan Africa is lower. That's what I mean. But we put higher priority for sub-Saharan Africa and other regions as well. Then, this is from this slide. This is the main point today's discussion. Probably we have a 10 or 15 minutes, 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Probably, I don't have to explain detail, but I'd like to raise some discussion point through this presentation. Today's world can be characterized by these keywords. One is multiple crisis, pandemic, and climate change, and debt stress, in particular in low middle income countries and lower middle income countries and low income countries. And of course, in addition to this, we need to consider geopolitical elements, typically China issues and Ukraine issue in Eastern Europe. That is important issue. And the second issue is changing the landscape of international development and giving rise to different arguments. Because traditionally, when we try to make argument about international development, many people imagine majority of the financial flow is ODA, official development assistance. But recently, ODA is not majority, in many years. Of course, ODA is dominant, larger portion, but we cannot neglect the presence or volume of private flow. From this viewpoint, traditionally, we consider ODA, role of ODA is to contribute social and economic development in developing countries. But nowadays, role of ODA is changing. We, of course, focus on contribution to development in developing countries. But at the same time, we try to utilize ODA to promote private flows and also stabilize the fluctuation of PF into developing countries. We say sometimes catalytic role. And also, changing in the context of changing the landscape, emerging donors after is also very important. Typically China and also Indonesia, in India. When I was in Nigeria, Tanzania, from 2014 to 2018, we sometimes need to recognize the larger presence of China and also India and also Turkey. Then, we cannot discuss the international development. It's among traditional donor only. And SDG as well. SDG target is 2030. Then, now is a very important timing Then these three keywords is characterize today's world. But we also need to consider what has changed and what has not changed in this changing the world. So this is my personal views. So what has changed is not always remain poor countries. Many people consider poor developing countries is still poor. But among the developing countries, some of developing countries is grown. Even sub-Saharan African countries. So when I was there, so Tanzania government and Kenya government every time emphasize. So we are already we are developing. Therefore, so donors or external supporter should recognize their growth achievement. Then, at the same time, this is the two sides of the coins, changing mindset of developing countries. We sometimes misunderstand. So developing countries eat developing countries, but so based on the economic growth achievement, the developing countries' mindset changes. It means they are growing, and also they are not the poor countries anymore. Then, so they try to request us to treat them more equal partnership. And third one is changing relationship between developing countries and donors. This is also same things. So traditionally, we every time consider relationship between donors and developing countries is aid provider and aid recipient. But based on these two issues, so they are more equal than before. And also development needs diversified. But sometimes among the international development community and domestic development community, we every time try to emphasize poverty issue or some philanthropic issue. It means that automatically, so development needs in our mind, so tends to focus on social issues like education and health and so on. But so growth achievement in developing countries means that they require so larger amount of investment into large scale infrastructure, like a power generation plant or transmission and ports and other type, and even in the case of the digitalization, right? And they also very interested in industrialization as well. And for recent world context, we also need to consider globalization or sometimes de-globalization, and sometimes we consider digitalization. But on the other hand, there are many things that does not change. Is poverty and inequality still persist? This is a bit contradictory statement, but definitely poverty and inequality still persist. Before Russian invasion to Ukraine, so poverty ratio is declining gradually. But even those declining trend, so absolute number of the poor people is so many, more than many people, not so small number. And after Russian invasion in Ukraine, so now and also pandemic, the global poverty is now increasing. Then, so we need to consider this issue as well. And humanitarian issue and also refugee issues still exist, and conflicts is very persistent, and also huge financial gap, both hardware and software, and knowledge gap is as well. Then, in this case, so against this changing world and changing the situation, so how should we do this through international development? So first one is we need to update our perception of developing countries, as I already explained. Developing countries, so according to categorization of World Bank. But they are not so developing countries, which we traditionally consider. And we should not push our image to developing countries categorically. This is very important thing. And second thing is pursuit of getting the basic right as a donor agency for international development. Because, for example, we have a G7 Hiroshima Summit, and in the recent context of G7 Summit, we G7 countries tried to emphasize the global south. That is very important. But so as I said, so situation change in some part. Therefore, so we need to consider. So what is getting the basic right? So getting the basic right for donors is so these points. So first one is holistic, long-term perspective. Of course, we are requested bear in mind geopolitical changes and other elements, other bilateral donors. At the same time, so development is a long process for developing countries. Therefore, and also, development covers so very comprehensive issues, not only poverty issues, but also economic development issues, agriculture, natural disaster, and so on. Therefore, to what extent so we can have a holistic and long-term perspective, this is very important issue. Second thing is respond to the needs of developing countries in the right way and at the right time. So this is also basic because one of the very important for donor is function is we are matching organization. There are many various type of demand in developing countries depending on the type of the economies and the geographical location and also population size and so on. But on the other hand, so there are some supply resources we can supply in the form of money or people and so on. Then, so after we identify the various type of needs in developing countries, so we try to design a project. Then, after designing the project, we try to mobilize resources. Therefore, so to what extent donors as an intermediary can successfully match this demand and supply. That's also very important. And plus timing. Development needs in developing countries cannot wait our convenience. And also to be humble, listen to the voice, not be prescriptive. They are countries with sovereignty, and they have people's taxpayer. Therefore, and also development process is not so our process. Our process. It means the driver's seat should be dominated by developing countries. Therefore, as a donor's position, we need to every time humble, and also we need to make efforts listen to what our recipient and client try to say to the end, and also we should not push our image or solution to them. And distinguish between what is needed and what is demanded locally and what is feasible. This is different thing. Even so we want to do something, so they may have a different situation. And also, so recipient country may have different views about their needs. Therefore, so distinguish between what is needed, what is demanded locally, and what is feasible. Then we need to so identify the better solution to meet local condition or context. And also present various options for their policy formulation and implementation. Because so international development is very complicated. Therefore, one of the key approach for donor is how many options so we can introduce recipient countries. Each country has its own experiences and options. Then through explanation, through presenting various options, and through explanation of pros and cons of each option, then let our recipient country decide which one is more suitable. This is very important issue. And hybrid approach, so addressing what has changed, what has not changed. Because this is a bit different issue. So sometimes donor tries to pursue the very popular issue or international trend, but that is very important. And sometimes for AI or digitalization, very important. Many recipient countries tries to receive those areas assistance. But on the other hand, there are something so they need to pursue in the long-term perspective. Even agriculture production and vocational training and other issues may be very boring, not follow the latest international trend, but sometimes that is very important issue. Therefore, not only focus on those international trends, but also we pursue the long-term issue. That is also very important. Then, so this is the last one. So important. So JICA's comparative advantage is, from my perspective, strong orientation towards implementation. Because development process is something, something to change in developing countries. Therefore, if so, we just emphasize the policy issue or framework issue, nothing happened in developing countries. Therefore, so we have a strong orientation towards implementation to support our counterpart countries and organizations. And so second advantage is various aid instruments. As I said, we have a grant aid, technical cooperation, and a concession loan, and private sector operation. So depending on the needs in developing countries, we try to mobilize various type of aid instruments timely and appropriate place, and long tradition of practices listening to the policies. So before, I have around 30 years experience in JICA, and also before London, I was a secondment professor to Japanese University, Yamaguchi University, and received many international students from developing countries. So I asked them, so what's the good point of Japanese aid? Every time they said, Japanese or JICA experts, so try to listen to their saying to the end. And at the same time, so Japanese is much easier for developing countries people to approach them. If they have many questions, so they can easily ask them, Japanese people. And also, so if they feel, so what Japanese experts say is not so appropriate or wrong, sometimes they can challenge easily. I don't know, this is a good thing, bad thing. But such kind of learning process is very important. And development experiences as non-Western countries, this is also very important. From the viewpoint of presenting the various type of option. And research, we have a research institute and research budget. Therefore, so probably after this, my presentation, Carl explained the more policy issue, so which include UK and Japan, and also comparative advantage of UK international development. So how we can combine these comparative advantage and disadvantage? This is a very important point. I think so. Comparison between UK and JICA is very complementary. So UK international development has something we do not have, and also JICA have, UK does not have. Simply saying, or extremely simply saying. Therefore, I think this is a good combination potentially. Okay, thank you very much for sorry for long discussion.
Thank you very much. So my name's Carl Aaron. I used to work for the World Bank and Foreign Office, DFID here, but now I'm working independently, which is why Jason was confused about what I actually do. But just wanted to start with two things, the sort of bridge between Amatsu-san and myself. 2 points I was going to make. Having done either for the World Bank or for DFID work in the field, the one impression that we always had of JICA projects there was their longevity and how their duration, if you like, and he was saying long term, and listening to people there. That doesn't happen with USA projects or UK government projects. Basically, whoever runs the program, that's their baby. They make it work for 4 years or 6 years, and then the new person comes in and they have a new project. Whereas, if I understand correctly, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, but basically people would come to the mission in, say, Kenya, and they would overlap a little bit, and they would inherit the project from before. So if they had the One Village project, which was an old one that I remember, you know, one group would be in the JICA mission, the embassy in say Nairobi, and then they would hand that project on. That simply does not happen in USAID or in DFID, or it might happen more in FCDO now, but I still think the competition to do something new, to go with the flow of the times, is very strong. And I think JICA, in doing pure work like that, is a very good model. Second point I was going to say is I have the advantage of not being employed by somebody like JICA or the Foreign Office or USAID at the moment, so I can say things that I know Amatsu-san can't say. So, and he did mention that we've just had the Hiroshima summit, Out of that came a communique which had a lot of development policy related language. There's also been a UK-Japan Hiroshima Accord that came out last week, I think, that is surprisingly very light on development cooperation. Lots of language about doing joint military exercises, lots of language about making both our economies stronger, but not much about ODA collaboration or that sort of area, which I think is a missed opportunity. So what we're talking about today, sort of in my world, is there's so much that we could be talking about to do with the G7, to do with policy, to do with implementation. So I have sort of a pitch that is what I think is important. And we'll see how far we get down that. But the pitch is, in the UK, the pure ODA agenda, so those traditional subjects of humanitarian, of assistance at the local level, of training, of environmental work, etc. Yes, the UK is still focused on that, but it's in some ways been diluted. You will have seen newspaper articles about how the aid budget to certain countries in Africa is being cut, and I've got a slide on that in a second. But also they're doing creative things like de-risking, using NGO money to support farmers, to make it, to take them from not being commercially viable to commercially viable. So you're de-risking, you're using the private sector to help companies, etc. I think that Japan is doing a better job of keeping pure ODA pure, but we'll come back to that. The bigger picture, Japan and the UK in some ways seem to be swapping places. So you will have seen from Amatsu-san's chart at the beginning that Japan is now, by a common definition that the OECD uses, third place in the amount of ODA dispersed, and they've swapped with the UK. So I think we're now fifth and France is now fourth. But you know, that's the headline figure, but there is so much debate, which I suspect many of you are aware of, for example, about how do we count hotel costs for immigrants and refugees in the UK. Is that aid budget? Is it not aid budget? And that's £3.5 billion last year. So that makes a big difference in how you calculate everything. But also in terms of proactivity, I was working with Japanese counterparts in the previous Japan chair of the G7, when the UK, especially on the development front, I felt that I helped that a little bit, but it was much more proactive on the development side, and Japan was still sort of following to some degree. It was taking the lead from others. But if you swap that to now, and you know, the UK simply does not have the same voice or confidence perhaps on the international stage, whereas Japan is becoming much more, not going to say assertive, but proactive about what it thinks is important. In terms of how you implement aid, how do you deliver it? There is bilateral aid and there is aid that goes through multilateral channels. The aid that goes through multilateral channels is of two types. One is core contributions to things like UN peacekeeping and such like, over which the donating country, the UK or Japan, does not have control. That goes into the core budget of the UN or the World Bank. There are also earmarked funds that go to the World Bank or similar for a particular agenda. It could be AIDS, it could be a country program, it could be North Africa agenda, it could be anything. But that still counts as bilateral because supposedly the donating country has made a choice of how its money is spent. It's not a case of we give it to a particular country, it's a case of do you have control over how that money is spent. And then there is bilateral aid, which is what the country, the UK or Japan itself has control over. So the money that would go to JICA, money that is used by FCDO to fund consulting companies or whatever to implement NGOs to implement projects. That proportion is the UK used to be very high. It used to be up at like 70% that was either core money or earmarked money through multilaterals, with relatively little that went directly. Japan was somewhere between 20 and 30%, I believe. The UK is now about 50%, but going down, not because they necessarily are doing more proactive things with the money, but because a lot of it is getting spent, for example, last year on refugee in donor country spending. But both countries are very much involved with multilateral channels, and I think whether it be standard multilateral like World Bank or UN, or what is now called minilateral, so ad hoc international groupings, which you might put the G7 under, or sub-agendas under that, there is a lot of potential there that I don't think is particularly well used. And the final point, I think, on the overview is that I think UK and Japan have a particular interest in doing something through a forum such as the G7 or through some minilateral initiative. And that's because the UK has much less money than it had before. In the 0.7% of gross national income that it was spending on aid is declining very rapidly, and you can play with the numbers, but it is declining. Whereas there are calls in Japan from various groups to double, I believe, the amount of money spent on ODA. Now, whether that is pure ODA or whether that will be some sort of hybrid that combines traditional ODA agendas and security agendas, one doesn't know. But so the money position is changing, and certainly the proactivity of how Japan or the UK express themselves is changing, certainly over the last 7 years that I have seen. So let's move on. So the pure development agenda, as I would call it, I mean, what was in the speech by Andrew Mitchell, who talked at Chatham House, he's the new junior, Minister of State for International Development. He emphasized the 4 things there, and there are some additional ones that came out of the integrated review refresh that came out. But investment, gender, humanitarian, climate and health, these are agendas that have always been important for the UK. They've always been doing it, but the question is how that is being done, how they are co-opting private finance to work on wind farms or invest in them through the CDC group, which is the development finance part of the UK government. There is a claim that 75% of projects are either focused on gender or have gender as a main objective, which is true, but because the UK had a Gender Act some years ago, you will not get a project approved unless it has gender as a significant objective. So, it's sort of chicken and egg discussion there. So there's a lot of energy that's gone into announcing these agendas, but the truth is that there is less money and there are a lot more claims on that money. Amatsu-san said that the FCDO has sort of control over the aid budget, which is true, but decreasingly so. I think 70% of the ODA amount, the development assistance amount, is covered by the FCDO at the moment. But of course, that used to be DFID plus FCO, so that's already been diluted in some ways. But whether it be the Home Office or Ministry of Defence or Business Environment, Industrial, I keep forgetting the acronym for BEIS. But so there is a lot of claims on that money, and it used to be a lot of money, and there are a lot of claims on that. So the resources that you can get, if you're interested, information about this from, the OECD does a good summary of what all OECD members do. The only thing you've got to remember about OECD is a membership club. So, they don't publish things that their members don't like. So you'll get a good comparative summary, but you won't get any criticism. So I was trying to summarize find a way of saying, how the sort of gender agenda has sort of changed. How we're doing pure gender, but there are issues with it. And then I went on to the DevEx website, which is a news agency focused on development work. And this was sort of other articles you may be interested in, which pretty much summarizes where UK aid this year. So yes, we've got a new gender strategy, but funding for certain parts of it have been cut. Yes, we spend money on immigration, but we spend more in the UK than we do overseas. And the cuts in the budget will continue. They may be massaged, they may be creatively adjusted, but they probably will continue. And UK age tumultuous 2022 pretty much captures it. So how has the UK changed or adapted its pure ODA areas? I mean, it's much more a case of bringing in business. How can we use business to catalyse and to increase the value for money we get from our aid spend, which it does quite well in many ways. CDC Group is using a lot of investment money and is catalysing commercial investment that might not otherwise have happened, but pushing it over the barrier into being commercial. They're leveraging finance by combining with other donors and other development finance institutions. They are de-risking. So there was a very good example from Rwanda where technical assistance came from the FCDO or DFID. A foundation provided some short-term support to the farmers to plant new coffee crops until they became mature enough to become a commercially viable crop, at which point the coffee or tea companies in that case invested. So that all worked together to create an investment otherwise wouldn't have happened. So that is a good thing of how they've adapted it. There is the meshing with security agendas. It's always happened. You can help fishing fleets check that no one's stealing their fish stocks by providing them with radar, sonar equipment, which is also useful for checking whether anyone else is invading their maritime area for another reason, be it a Chinese trawler, be it a submarine or whatever. So there is sort of dual purpose things, which I'm jumping ahead here, but the new Japanese Overseas Security Assistance Fund, very small, a pilot fund at the moment, but that first activity was for sonar equipment, radar equipment for the Philippines Coast Guard, I believe. So that's happening both in Japan and the UK. I've mentioned the budget shifting from FCDO before to other government departments. So I think I've probably covered a lot of this before, but you've got it in the slides, and I'm happy to share these with everyone afterwards if you'd like. So the three delivery channels for ODA are pure bilateral, i.e. full national control over the spend, core multilateral and earmarked multilateral. So my thoughts on that is Japan is good at keeping pure by having JICA do that agenda. And I mean, I think other countries have struggled with value for money and using consultancies. USAID, for example, is in a massive push at the moment to localize their spend. A lot of money got spent through consulting companies, development partners in the US. There was even a time, many years ago now, when there was a push from the US public to say, all this money we're spending overseas, we're not sure about this. And USAID put on their website, 5 out of every $10 of overseas assistance stays in the US. They got slammed for that very quickly, and they withdrew that. But you know, that fungibility of money and what you do, and do you get value for money from consulting companies, remains an issue both in the US and in the UK. But the more you cut the number of staff you have working on the agenda, the more money they have to manage per person, and therefore the more they have to involve outside companies to manage. These statistics I put up there, they are a little bit rough and ready, partly because not all the figures have been released, which you can see on the right hand side. But that chart tells you partly about the multilateral spend issue, about how much goes to the multilateral agenda, which I see as an opportunity. It also shows you the in-country donor refugee issue, which is the current big issue about, are we really using UK aid for aid at the moment? And there's also the point about the FCDO share. So 2020 it was 74% of the spend, and that was already bringing together DFID and FCO, down to 72%, and largely influenced by the immigration spend last year at 60% at the moment. Then the 0.7% issue is very difficult in the UK, because when it was agreed by all parties, by Conservatives, by Labour, Liberal Democrats. They all said this is a fantastic thing, which is why it lasted for quite a long time. But then, due to all sorts of things, it went down to 0.5%. It's now gone up to 0.51%, again because of the immigration spend issue. If you take that out, it looks a lot different. And on that chart, I think if you take all the domestic spend on refugees out, the percentage of GNI on ODA spent by different countries changes a lot. The average is 0.31. Still, Japan and the UK are much higher. Japan is actually higher. The US is lower, but they spend an awful lot more money, so they sort of get a free pass on that one. So this is my attempt to do a comparison. How much time do I have left? Nothing. Okay, so we'll stop. Give me a couple more minutes. So I think perhaps we'll just skip this one, because we summarise perhaps the thing I want to bring out in that is the proactivity of Japanese ODA policy. So the idea that that the ODA agenda and the security agenda and the private sector, etc., can go in new ways. The official security assistance, which is a new category, I think it's only $60 million or something, very small at the moment, but it's like a pilot. And I have to say, it reminded me of when China began the Special Economic Zone program many years ago. They didn't know whether it would work. They didn't know whether it'd be a good idea, but they thought they'd try it. If it doesn't work, it was a pilot, you just stop it. If it does work, you can make it bigger and do more things with it. And I feel that that could be the same way. If people think it's a good idea and it seems to work, it could become much bigger and it could be used in various ways. And for both the UK and Japan, I think that I suppose this is a key point, that the multilateral channel is really important. Japan in the past used multilateralism because any time they tried to do anything that wasn't sort of pure development or pure assistance bilaterally, without multilateral partners, generally speaking, China would jump up and down and say, imperialist Japan, beware, you don't want this to happen. And so they step back. Now, where Japan is becoming more proactive, when, again, we're straying into policy here, but where Japan announced the new national security strategy last year, within about 20 minutes, there was a press release from the White House saying, we think this is great. So, you know, I think that Japan needs to do things, but for different reasons through multilateral collaboration. The UK is a different case. We've got less money, so we really want to leverage a fora where you can say, you know, we have contributed to this, or we've worked on this project, we've made a difference in country X in Egypt, say, through this £1 billion project. The UK actually spent 200 million of that, and the other 800 came from other donors, other like-minded donors. But you still get credit for it. You can leverage the money you have. And I think the influence that Japan has, that the UK has, its moral high ground, if you like, on development. Because of staff cuts and other things, there's not quite as much input into multilateral thinking, if you like. I'm sure I've run out of time, so I will stop there. Thank you very much.